you'll notice we put the two members of the panel who might be able to vote us off on the other side of the room. Now mai, haere mai, welcome everyone to the beautiful Auckland Museum. I'm Noelle McCarthy, and it's a pleasure to be back to moderate another of our Smart Talk panels. It is a feast for the senses tonight. We're talking about how Auckland eats itself. And you will be wanting to stay until the end tonight, because after our panel we have a tiramisu demonstration, courtesy of Star Chef Will Bazira over there from Coco's Cantina. And I'll be interviewing Damaris and Renee while Will demonstrates how to make the perfect tiramisu. Those of you who follow Coco's on Instagram know that they've been putting a good 48 hours work into marinating those lady fingers in the marsala. And yes, in good tradition, there will be one for everyone in the audience. So be sure to wait to the end. But that is all still to come. Before dessert, we have the meat and potatoes part of the evening, or the tofu and noodles, depending on your preference. And that's our panel. And the theme of the panel tonight, we're talking about food. We're getting our teeth into food culture. And when we talk about food, it means we're also talking about restaurants, we're talking about ingredients, we're talking about community, we're talking about history, we're talking about television, of course. And we are well served tonight with a panel that encompasses a range of perspectives on this subject, from the sociological to the historical to the good old hands-on. Connie Clarkson is beside me, one of our best-known and best-loved foodies. She is an author, a chef, a TV and radio personality with vast experience in the industry. She's a former director of the Auckland Cooking Academy, a former restaurant owner. Some of you may have eaten at the French Cafe when it was under Connie's care. You may have fond memories of that. She's been cooking and writing all of her life. And she's long been a high-profile advocate for Asian flavours, long before it was fashionable to be so, before you could get sesame oil down at the dairy. Connie introduced us to a lot of those flavours via her book of the same name. Please welcome Connie Clarkson. And beside Connie, distinguished Professor Paul Spoonley. Paul is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Massey University. You probably already know Paul's voice from a range of media interviews. He's one of our foremost demographers, an expert on immigration. He also knows what that means, not just for the changing face of New Zealand, but as migrants bring with them new food trends, for the changing kitchens and restaurants of New Zealand as well. Professor Spoonley, welcome to you. Ben Bailey's background is as a former senior chef at Michelin-starred restaurants like the Ledbury and the Square in London and restaurant Jean-Paul Jeunet in France. He's now the executive chef at the Grove and Baduzzi restaurants in Auckland. Recent reviews for the Grove have ranged from sublime, soaring to ever greater heights, exciting and unique, the complete fine dining package, and Metro Magazine's simple declaration, there's an expert in the kitchen at the Grove. He's been Chef of the Year at the Cuisine Good Food Awards in 2014 and 2015, and you'll have seen him last night on TV. He's currently filming season 2 of My Kitchen Rules. Welcome, Ben. And another familiar face beside Ben, Te Kohe Tuhaka, is an actor, a presenter, and a chef. You might recognize him as the baddie in the kick-ass Terreo action movie, The Deadlands. Superbly fearless and irreverent, the Hollywood Reporter called him. And that's a good description for Marae Kai Masters as well, superbly fearless and irreverent. It features contestants from Marae all over the North Island competing against one another. And not only that, but showcasing the best of local flavours and delicacies and techniques. And he's the right man to host this show because TK was telling us earlier, he actually became a chef to support himself through drama school. So he's done the hard yards as well. Welcome to you, TK. Kia ora. So that's our panel. The format is that we'll talk amongst ourselves for the next 50 minutes or so, and then we're going to open this to the floor. But the floor is open now, virtually, online. If you use the hashtag #LateMuseum, you can get your question up on our Twitter feed, and Holly will be feeding through some of our questions to us as the panel goes on. So if there's something you're burning to say or to ask any of the panelists, just get your phones out and tweet them. But keep the phones on silent, please, because we are taping this session for broadcast on Radio New Zealand National, as we always do. That's coming up now. You'll be able to listen to the full 2015 series of these Smart Talks. They start at 4 o'clock this Sunday, repeated at 9 o'clock next Tuesday. And this particular session will be broadcast on the 8th and the 10th of November. And if you miss any of those when they're on air, just go to our online archive. If you search for Smart Talk, you'll be able to find them. radionz.co.nz. So that housekeeping done, let's begin. Connie, it's good to begin with you because you've been thinking and writing about food and introducing us to new kinds of food in Auckland for, I don't know how long now, over 20 years at least.
Been a while.
It's been a while.
Yep.
How have things changed?
It's very exciting, I think. I've been thinking about it since getting here, and I feel so proud to be in Auckland. I've travelled a little bit, and you know, everything in Auckland is quite superb. You just don't have to go very far to find great food. I think the changes, though, there's so much more now. There's so much variety now, and the choice set is huge. You can eat very cheaply and very well. You can eat very well and very expensively too. In the past, the availability of ingredients was very limited. I think we were all talking this evening about the fact that you couldn't get a lot of stuff, and garlic was in the old days quite exotic. Can you imagine saying that now? Things have changed a lot in the dining scene.
You couldn't get hold of coconut, you told us, when you started out.
That's right. I was at Columbia College at the age of 16, fresh out of Singapore, and Padma Naidu, who was the house mistress, and I were the only non-white people in that entire school. And I was desperately crying for curry. And in the boarding school, Padma's apartment was the only place that I could go cook. And there is no coconut milk. There was not any coconut milk in the late 70s. And so we'd go to Wali, get desiccated coconut, boil it up with milk. Oh my God, it was terrible. But that's the lengths that we went to even try and approximate the taste of coconut milk for a curry. And that's how, I reckon that's how ethnic food is produced here out of the country, through sheer need and willpower of the people that want to eat it.
Migrant communities bring their food with them, of course, Paul. I mean, you have to eat. It's a daily necessity.
It is, and of course, most of our migrants traditionally came from the UK, so our food is very much a reflection of that influence.
And Ireland.
And Ireland, thank you. And so as we diversified our migrant flows, our food diversified, but not all, because Pacifica came in the 60s and 70s and has had very little impact upon our food. So it's still difficult to find a restaurant that serves Pacifica food here in Auckland, which is the largest concentration of Pacifica anywhere in the world.
That's an interesting observation. Do you think that goes for Māori food as well, TK?
Yeah, to be honest, I would agree with that. I think it comes down to a lot around the knowledge of Māori food. Like, saying Māori food doesn't necessarily mean that there are Māori food experts. There are definitely very strong Māori ingredients, things like I talk about eel, mutton, bird, kina, things that frequent the marae, ingredients like that. But the ways and the styles that those foods have been prepared and cooked are no different to cooking a normal roast, to cooking, a bone broth or boil up or anything like that. It's trying to encourage Māori ringawera or Māori cooks to upskill their skills to be able to bring that and put it into a restaurant sort of environment, which is changing a lot. I'd have to say it's moving a lot forward a lot better, because there's a massive interest in becoming a chef or becoming a foodie based with all the food shows that we have on television.
Is that something you've seen in your time in the industry, Ben?
I think so, yeah. I think people are now looking to their own history as an inspiration for food. You see that a lot in places like Scandinavia, where people like Rene Redzepi in the restaurant Noma are looking back to their Viking roots to find inspiration for our new style of food. And I sometimes wonder when we as New Zealanders are going to do that, especially for Māori cuisine, and who's going to grab the baton and run and create the Noma of New Zealand with respect to Māori food.
Noma, yeah, you talk about Noma. There are restaurants now, aren't there, that seem to have transcended even the word restaurant. They're almost temples to eating. We have the top 10 lists. We have chefs like Farah and Adria. You interviewed Farah and Adria, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. So he seems to be over it all. I mean, he's now looking towards leaving a legacy on this world when he passes, and he's creating he works in a bully lab, and he's creating a thing called Bullypedia. His restaurant was called Al Bully. He's created Bullypedia, which will take 10 years and 15 million euros. So he's basically categorizing food with 60 experts and scientists, and you walk in there and they have pinboards up, and they'll have the genealogy of shellfish, and will go down from every different type of shellfish and oyster you can think of, and as soon as you touch on one ingredient, for example oysters, then you can just see that there's just so much knowledge there, and the only way that we have of accessing that information at the moment is by going Google, and you Google oysters, and whoever's paid the money or however the hell Google works, that's what information you receive first. So he's trying to provide an unbiased categorization of food where you're able to source information that's not influenced by anything else. So it's pretty extraordinary.
Wow, well, that's taking food knowledge to a whole new level. But Paul, a lot of communities, that sort of knowledge is kept informally, isn't it? And, and passed down from generation to generation. It's not even necessarily written down.
No, and I think Connie's example before is typical of what migrants do. And I think the thing that's changed here, particularly in Auckland, is that the size of your co-ethnic communities is now so large, and they do want authentic ingredients. So it begins to merge from the private sphere, the home, and it becomes part of the public sphere. And I think it's had some very interesting impacts. I mean, I happened to mention in passing to a journalist that I ate sushi 3 or 4 times a week, and the reaction's been quite interesting. And I don't think my parents' generation, if I'd said I'm going to eat raw fish surrounded by vinegared rice and seaweed, there would have been so many things wrong with that my father was an immigrant from Liverpool. There would have been so many things wrong with that for him, and yet it's now become something that many people in this room would eat on a regular basis.
And also be able to assess the quality of. I mean, we all know when we've had sushi that wasn't up to par. But your dad had some interesting delicacies as well, TK, you were telling us earlier. Speaking of dads.
Well, when we all think about food, we think about it, and it's a memory. But your food memory versus my food memory is totally different. And it could be the same meal. But to go back to the sushi talk, when I first moved to Wellington, so I was fresh from the East Coast. I'd never lived in a big city before. There was no sushi joint in Gisborne. Okay? And everybody drank instant coffee. And so when I first was introduced to a sushi, sort of just like a sushi place, I thought it was the craziest thing to be eating raw fish with rice wrapped in seaweed. I was like, how is that nice? How is that delicious? And then I have memories of my grandfather. Now, my grandfather grew up in the generation when there was no refrigeration, so everything was fermented. Everything was fermented. He had this famous green bucket with an enamel plate on it, which would have a whole crayfish inside it, covered in seawater, and he would hang it on the washing line. And he would just leave it there in the baking sun of summer, open the window every morning, take a big sniff, and go, nope, not ready yet, close the window. So letters from the council were coming, complaints about the smell, but he was of that generation. And then when it was ready, when the smell was right, he'd open it up, take a big spoon. It was the colour that was probably not even in a rainbow. And then he'd mix it around, and then my grandmother would make fresh bread and he would eat it. And we as children would be like, just dumbfounded by all of these things. But it's that whole, his food memory is that. My food memory was something totally different. But it's about having these food memories and trying to recreate these things that don't sit in the sun for like 3, 4, 5 weeks. Yeah.
Did you ever taste it, incidentally?
I have to be honest. I got close to it, but
Downwind.
as it was coming, I was strong over here, and then was it so strong? Was it so strong? Was it so strong? Yeah.
It's an important point he's making, isn't it, Connie, that food connects us?
Definitely. We all have memories of sitting around the dinner table and having conversation. I remember that with my kids, they're now grown up, the only time that we'd ever get to speak to them was around the dinner table. Otherwise, they're off, they're gone, they're away doing their things. My fondest memory really is after church in Singapore, we'd go home, Mum would put the pot of hot water on the stove. Dad would go to the market, sometimes I'd go with him, and they'd get fresh prawns and fresh crab and fresh seafood, and he'd be running back with it and it'd go straight into the pot, and we'd be there for hours just eating, and the extended family would come, not just us, but the cousins and the friends, and they all come and we'd be there all afternoon eating this spanking fresh seafood. But the abiding memory is the conversations that we actually had, you know, and that's how communities are built, I think.
And yet we know, don't we, that families are spending less and less time sitting together around the meal table. There's a squeeze there, Paul.
Yes, there is. And one of the things that's changed is that New Zealanders have been great travellers, particularly since the 60s and 70s. And at this point, there's about 800,000 New Zealanders living in another country. And they're bringing back new taste experiences, new food memories, but they're also doing something which my generation didn't do so much, and that's do takeaways and eat outs. So there's a big change in our food habits in terms of where we eat food these days, and what Connie's just described as being a home experience now is just as likely to be a restaurant experience.
Well, you'd agree with that, Ben, wouldn't you? A good restaurant feels like a home away from home.
Yeah, the owner of the Grove, Michael, always says that the restaurant is an extension of his home, and he gets really upset when people disrespect, that environment. He feels like someone has come into his house and, said something bad or not enjoyed themselves, and he takes it really to heart. And so it has negative connotations as well. And I think sometimes it's nice to approach a restaurant like that, but it's a restaurant essentially, first of all, especially in New Zealand, it's a business, and it's a business like any other business, and it must make money to survive and to pay everyone's mortgage. And we employ 65 people over 2 restaurants. That's a lot of bills that get paid. So you have a responsibility in that respect first, and so if you can make it a family environment at the same time, then that's a real win.
How much, and I'll talk to Damaris and Renee about this later, but I'm interested to know how much guidance you think people need on, and Connie, you might have your own experience on this, on behaving in restaurants. Do you think it helps people to have a steer, to have someone come down at the beginning and say, well, this is how we do things, this is how our meals are arranged, this is how the menu works?
That's how it works. That's how it works on the marae. All right, this is what we're having. You don't like it, eat somebody else's. If they're having the same thing, then that's what it is.
Would that work in Baduzzi?
I think one of the most important things when guests arrive, especially in New Zealand, people are quite awkward and they don't know what to do, they don't know where to hang their coat, or they don't know, and you really got to have great front of house staff that will, they'll see that customer or every customer, and they'll just know how to instantly relax them, and make them feel comfortable, and from there, that's the first step, and then once the people feel comfortable, then it's just about gently point them in the direction of how you do things. But, sometimes people come to the restaurant and they want, 3 courses, and they want this and they want that, and they want things like that it's always been. And so you've got to be able to cater for everyone as well.
I think out of respect for our restaurateurs, and I want to defend them, that not every criticism should be about the restaurateur, and I think that we need to critique the diners as well, because sometimes there are diners that should not be allowed out there. I have so much respect for dining rooms that run well, for restaurateurs that actually set standards, that take so much care to deliver a beautiful environment, fantastic drink, immaculate food, and careful service. And then you get those bastards that will go in there and they will be rude just because they can. And you can pick them. They won't tip, they will complain so they can get money off the bill, and those people need critiquing themselves, really, because it's not fair. I do not know of a single restaurateur that does not go into it wanting to do something fabulous. I mean, how many do? And it's the responsibility of the diner as much as a restaurateur to extricate as good as experience for you as possible.
So it's a two-way street.
I think it's a two-way street. And you can blame yourself as much if you have a bad dining experience as you can blame the restaurant.
Have you seen a change? Have you seen a change in the way people behave in your time?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think that people are more demanding these days. I don't know if Ben agrees, but I think that because they travel, they might be a little bit more demanding. They might be wanting, I don't know, we're going to talk about authenticity at some stage, but because people have travelled a lot, they get to know what the real thing tastes like somewhere else. And so I wonder how much people understand what a real laksa tastes like, and how much they actually demand it when they come here, for example.
But not all audiences for that laksa are the same. I mean, Paul, if you're serving food to and within a migrant community who's settled in New Zealand, that'll be a different demand for authenticity, presumably.
Yes, and I think that's the thing that we've all benefited from. So as the migrants have come in, and of course we've got some very large communities here in Auckland, Chinese, Indian, but also a lot of other Asian communities, they've really demanded not only authenticity in terms of products, but in terms of the dishes. And then it's interesting to see how many of them are beginning to look at the crossover audiences, because you can go to places on Dominion Road and you could be somewhere in China, language, smells, food, and they don't make any concession, as earlier Chinese restaurateurs would do, to a Western sensibility. So the chop suey places you will not find there. And I think that crossover point's going to come. I think we're going to see a cuisine that evolves out of some of these community and immigrant restaurants.
I've just had a dumpling experience that I've got to share and ask everybody's experience of this, because I got a little bit irate, and with due respect to anybody, I bought 30 dumplings for $7 from the tofu shop on the same trip that I got to Faroes. Oh God, am I allowed to say names? Yeah, right. Anyway, so got to Faroes and they were demonstrating porcini-filled chicken dumplings at $29.99 for 16. So I ask you, what do you reckon you're going to buy? I mean, the $29.99 were absolutely divine. I've got to tell you, they were delicious. They were packaged up to the nines. They had so many layers of biodegradable something or another around them that it was unbelievable, and they would have paid some kind of designer some kind of fee for a logo that went on this thing. And I looked at it, and I don't know what I think, actually, and I'm just interested in this comparison. I took our 30 pieces of dumplings for $7 home. The grandchildren and I hoovered through them and had a perfectly wonderful time.
But is it fair, this is about disposable income from what you're saying. Is it fair to say, Ben, that Aucklanders are perfectly willing and able to spend what disposable income they have on high-end food?
I think so. I think it's surprising. I mean, you look at the population of Auckland, and but then you look at the population that actually would have that disposable income to dine out, is actually would be quite small, I would think. Or maybe you could answer that better, but I just think that it's phenomenal how many restaurants are opening and how expensive they are. I mean, cheap eats all the way through, actually, and the diversity, and I sometimes wonder when it's going to end and there's another restaurant opening, but we don't really seem to see too many closing. And so I just wonder where this income is coming from, the disposable income, because I would struggle to afford to eat out as much as some people that eat out.
Is it fair to say, Paul, that different groups and different sectors of society have different priorities?
Yes, and I think to go to both Ben and Connie's point is that I think you're seeing a segmentation of the market. So farro meat's a very important part of the Auckland market, which is looking for organic, authentic, in their terms, products. And in the case that Ben's, I mean, there are some very expensive restaurants in this town which do a very good trade in terms of bringing people in through the door. And Ben, I think you've got to remember that this town has more disposable income put together than literally the rest of New Zealand. So if it's not going to make it in Auckland, it's going to be difficult to make it elsewhere.
And yet this is this rise of the food truck community that I'm particularly interested in seeing. I mean, I work down on the waterfront, and on the summertime, you know, Silo Park's just full of food trucks, and there is some awesome food coming out of food trucks, and maybe they can afford to actually produce great authentic food because the rent is cheap, and so, you know, you don't actually have to do too much to actually recoup that. And you can begin with great ingredients. I mean, there's some amazing food in the markets as well.
Well, can I say that we're following trends? So if you take Portland, they make a virtue of having mobile food, and they've got 500 food trucks. And so it's one of those new waves that's coming along that's going to be here.
It's global, but it's also cyclical. I mean, food trucks, you must see food trucks on the side of the road, mobile food, TK, when you're out filming.
I think we've also got to be mindful of how awesome social media is. For instance, on the weekend just gone, my fiance and I, on Facebook, found out that there was going to be a food truck down at number 1 Queen Street Cafe. I saw the menu, I saw the pictures, I want to eat that. So we got in the car, disposable income again, drove all the way down there, ordered one off the menu, ate everything, and then there was another one there. So ordered one off that menu and ate everything off that. But I think this is the evolution of marketing your business, your restaurant. It's through social media, and it can make or break. It used to be about, I always hear people go, I went down Dominion Road and ate this awesome dumpling dish. And just based on that, if it was someone that I knew, friend of mine, I would go there. So food trucks are awesome. My question about food trucks is, are they creating these food trucks in the hoping that the rent does come down and they can open something? Or
just stick the blocks up. Stick the wheels up on blocks and keep them there.
Or is it, for me, food is about two things. It's about the ingredients that are used, but it's also about the story about the dish. Where does this dish come from? How does it affect you as a person who's making it? Take me on a journey through your food, but I'm happy also to go into, an awesome restaurant, and I'm a little bit, because I'm in the arts, I use that as an opportunity, like going to watch a piece of theatre. I want to be taken away for the however many hours I sit in your establishment and taken on a journey that makes me forget about what's going on in my life, and leave there with a new food memory.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Restaurant.
But I'm also a person who goes to a restaurant who's open to, being a part of the show. Not sitting back and just judging and going, hey, you're getting your lines wrong. You're just sitting back and go, oh, yeah, I'm with you. I will run with you. If you take me, I will run with you.
There's so many reasons why one goes out to dinner, though, or lunch.
It's never just because you're hungry, is it?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's because you're hungry, but if you're hungry, you just go get what you got to get. But, you go to celebrate, you go to commiserate, you go to run away from reality, you go to find a friend. There are so many reasons why one dines out. I would be interested to know, which bit of it actually gives you the best and the most enjoyment, really. I recently had dinner with a whole group of foodies, some of whom in the restaurant, and I'm rabbiting on, but I was just getting onto the access of mobile phones and food porn.
Oh, yes.
And for once, it felt okay for all 20 of us. The minute the dish came down, out came the cell phones, and it was nobody was allowed to touch anything until the photograph was taken. And you know what? It was okay, because we were all in the same business, and we were all doing the same thing, and we were all tweeting like crazy. But I reckon that's the way that the love of food's being spread so beautifully.
So is it okay to do selfies in Baduzzi? Do you have a selfie policy, Ben? Or
No, we don't care, no. You've got to look at it. It's sort of, any publicity is good publicity sometimes, and these people are talking about your restaurant and engaging at a level that it's quite hard to reach, because it's so authentic. I guess good or bad. I mean, if you run a Facebook page as a restaurant and you're sponsoring stuff and you're boosting posts, and it loses that authenticity, because you've paid Facebook to promote your own stuff. But I think that it's an extension of the word of mouth concept, isn't it? This is the world that we live in.
And there's an element of performativity that comes in that relates back to what you're saying, TK. There's a stagedness to it, and a capacity to come together in order to do it.
It's food brings people together and all of that, but it is, I like, we'll take Jervois Steakhouse, for instance. I was really, really hungry for a Sunday roast. Opened my Facebook, boom, they do Sunday roast. I rang up, I couldn't get in. And that's how popular it is. But for me, it's about going on their journey. It's about, they're obviously doing it. I don't know what it's going to be like. It could be terrible for all I know. But I'm willing to go on those journeys. I'm willing to go on those journeys because I enjoy the entertainment of being a part of the story.
I want to come back to what we were talking about earlier, Paul, about the influence of migrants on food culture. Why is it that some cultures have a disproportionate influence on the type of food we eat? I mean, you mentioned English and Irish migrants coming to New Zealand. Historically, I don't see a soda bread culture in New Zealand or a bacon and cabbage history here. The Irish haven't really left their food print in a way that the Italians have. And somebody tweeted, why is it that given our Dalmatian heritage, we don't have more of that sort of cuisine in Auckland?
And it's interesting because if you think about it, we've got layers. So there's the early Chinese, and most of us, our experience of a non-British food would have been going to a Chinese restaurant. And then, of course, the next layer is really probably the Thai restaurants. And the Thai restaurant community, restaurant here in New Zealand is disproportionate to the size of the Thai community. So it's not the size of the community necessarily which counts, but it's the way in which it could be marketed. And I think it's partly the way in which our food tastes have evolved. So once we began to get the taste for Asian foods, then we began to explore, and Thai fits, and Thai is a universal food. You'll find it all around the world, and it's a very attractive food. And then, of course, we began to get the new layers post-2000 as these migrant communities came in. But to go back to a point I made earlier, it's still very difficult to get a Pacifica restaurant or a Māori restaurant or a Croatian restaurant. And I think what we've got is there's a tendency to say, well, the Asian food is important. And of course it is in Auckland because a quarter of our population are now Asian. But the other thing that arrived on our shores was the US multinational. And we forget the Burger Kings and the McDonald's. You know, there's another side to the internationalisation of food, which is also quite important. And I'm interested to know why we focus on what we call ethnic, which is Asian, but we don't classify the multinationals in the same way who've come here, because they have certainly made a huge impact on our food landscape.
And arguably that's about money as well. That's about a low price point at your Burger King or your McDonald's. A question for all of you. Why is it that and this goes back to your porcini dumplings, why is it that it can be so expensive to eat well? To eat organic food, to eat good food, to eat food that hasn't been treated with chemicals or preservatives. The cost can mount up with that very, very quickly, can't it?
I wonder if it's because of... I champion cheap eats, I always have from very early on. I wonder if there is, you know, apart from the likes of Baduzzi and the Grove and chefs like Ben, who do things properly, and that's worth a premium, and I'd walk over broken glass for those crayfish dumplings. But
seconded.
Yeah, but there is something about the snobbery of expensive things that I don't know if it's actually required. I've always thought that it's just as easy to get a $10 bowl of noodles at a food court and pay $17 for a approximate bowl of noodles at one of the more salubrious noodle shops that don't taste as good, actually. I know where I prefer to be. I won't get the cocktails and I won't get the music, but I get a great bowl of noodles, and that's what I'm there for.
Mm. What about skills, Ben? Is it because, you know, we seem to buy more cookbooks than we've ever bought? You're both testament to the growing popularity of cooking television. But are we actually cooking? You know, have those skills come along?
I sometimes wonder. I get asked to do a recipe for a magazine, and I wonder if I should just put like a joke in there just to see, like, put 10 egg whites in it to see if anyone actually would cook it. I mean, it's... I think we know more about food, but whether we could execute that knowledge into something practical is another thing. And that just speaking generally of people out there. I mean, people, for whatever reason, there's been a massive interest in food television and all that, and that's driven it. And celebrity chefs on a worldwide scene are seen as godlike. And so... But we all have to eat, and so I guess why not make it interesting? So people have really gotten behind it.
And that depends on the place where cooking and making meals is given within the culture, doesn't it, Paul? You know, how much respect that has.
Yes, and I think if you think back to the cookbooks that we grew up with, which was Edmund's cookbook, which now looks very sort of naive and quite crude in many ways.
And yet the best banana cake you will ever make.
It's true.
Yeah, and it has very good recipes. I'm not criticising that, but there's an industry that's grown up which has made food a public thing that you consume and that you understand. And we now, our conversations about food are quite different to conversations we had 20 or 30 years ago. I think we've become more sophisticated. I think food television and the metro, where to get the best whatevers, and who heard of a lot of the ingredients, again, 20 or 30 years ago. So, you know, for those of us who are Pākehā like myself, you know, we now have nampla in our kitchen. So we practice our food, we understand our food, and we enjoy our food in very different ways.
My father smuggled in kaffir lime leaf, kaffir seeds, and Vietnamese mint. Don't tell the Minister of Ag and Fish. In the mid-80s, and he said that, darling, it was very hard to get them into the country, so this is the way you make them grow. You plant it in the garden and you piss on it and it will work. And so we actually had, in the early days, we had a kaffir lime tree. But these days, you don't have to do that because you get the leaves in the supermarket,
Yeah.
And you go to Avondale markets and you can get all the Vietnamese herbs you'd ever want. And it's actually cool, whereas you had to go and smuggle them in yourself previously in order to get it. And I think that actually contributes to the wide variety of ethnic food or Asian food that we actually now can get, and it's growing cheaper to get it,
Yeah. But we've got to learn how to use that. So that's the transformation that's occurred.
That's right.
Which comes back to your point, TK, about what you're finding on the marae when you're talking to people about food memories.
Yeah, so, with Marae Kai Masters, the whole purpose of the show was to put traditional kai back on the plate, but not just for marae, but for everyone, to make it accessible to everybody. And so, for me personally, I grew up in a generation where I didn't have to worry about where the meat came from. I didn't have to worry about where the veggies came from. I didn't have to worry about where the milk came from because I grew up in Gisborne in a small community, and you either hunted or you gathered, and I grew up on a milking farm, so I just milked the cows anyway. It wasn't until I moved, I left home, and it was my first year drama school, and I went, I'll go and do some shopping. And I realised how expensive meat is in this country. So, being me, I rang up to my dad, who brought down a little chili freezer for me and plugged it into my flat. And it was gone in a month because I gave it out to everybody who went to drama school. But traditional ingredients are ingredients that are not just traditional to Māori, it's just traditional to all New Zealanders, because we all live in these little centres. But with food television, with food shows, I have seen over the last 4 years of being a part of Marae Kai Masters, the greater curiosity around Western styles of cooking, but applying it to things like mutton bird, wild pork, freshly caught fish, and each marae is regional. So you're either a marae that's inland, which you get a lot of, the traditional Māori bush asparagus, piko, along a whole lot of other things, or you're, towards the coast and you have access to the sea and to the rivers and things like that. Some of the food that has come out in the show is phenomenal. I was explaining to everybody recently, there was a traditional dish which I had never seen, I'd never heard about, and it was cooked on a small marae on the east coast, and I sat amongst a whole lot of elders from this marae, mainly women, and they were all in their 80s, 70s and 80s. And this traditional dish is called pukunako, which is the stomach of a kahawai, just kahawai fish, emptied out and then refilled with all the hearts and kidneys of the fish, along with bush asparagus, herbs, Māori herbs, and then it's baked. I had a an elderly woman sitting next to me who was 87. The last time she saw that dish, she was 7 years old. She sat there, stared at it, crying, smiling at the same time. And I was trying my hardest to relate to the food memory. But then, you got to take on a whole lot of history as well. Got to take a whole lot of history. So what's come out of Marae Kai Masters is a whole new generation of young Māori cooks who want to be chefs, so they can share their grandparents or their great-grandparents' food memories. And that's what's coming out of these regions. And they have great accessibility. What they do lack is they lack those finishing touches, those techniques, which they're only learning from TV. They're not actually going out to learn them. They're just, YouTube is an amazing thing, people. Yeah. But hey, they've got to start somewhere.
So forget the Vikings at Noma, Ben. Forget
exactly.
the foraging. We want to get to the marae.
We need to look inwardly and see what's going on in our own country. But I guess we can learn from what's going on over there, and we can be inspired by that and apply it here. Would be great. Yeah.
That's a confidence, isn't it? That's a confidence when it comes to handling ingredients and using techniques. And there's a circularity in how that comes around, Paul, in terms of generations.
Yes, and I think to go back earlier, I think we travelled. I mean, you've travelled and gained techniques from overseas, and it's that combining those techniques with New Zealand food sources, which is going to produce, I think, a quite new sort of cuisine in New Zealand, and I would like to add in there the younger generations of Asians who are New Zealand born and New Zealand growing up. They're going to be quite different. They're not going to be like Connie and have those food memories of Singapore. They're going to have food memories which are created here, and I think it's going to provide a very interesting catalyst. And I don't know what's going to emerge, but hopefully between the expertise of Ben and the new generations that are coming through, those who are wanting to reclaim ingredients and traditions, that's going to be exciting.
I think that we'd be really surprised how these young people, and a lot of them are second generation, will be very keen to preserve their tradition. I've had something to do with a group called the Future Jargons. They're a wonderful group of people. They're young, they're fresh, they're keen as mustard to make it in the city. And they have parents who are an older generation that actually have traditions from their homeland. They have their friends who are not of their homeland, and they struggle in this trough of how to exist and marry the two. And the ones that I know are really very keen to preserve the tradition and introduce their tradition to their friends. And I have high hopes, I really do, that they'll bring it. They really will. But we also have people who actually come here from outside of the country that bring things with them that if we trouble to go and look for them, they will show it to us. And it's nothing more potent than there is a restaurant in Pakurana called Beijing Duck Restaurant, and it's only $45 for a whole Beijing duck. But what you don't know is that the chef actually trained in Dadong Duck, which is the Peking duck restaurant in Beijing that goes back centuries, and he is here. We've got one of them here, and he does it right. And he brings the duck to the table and he whittles the duck in front of you. Within a minute, he's got the entire duck carved up and it's on your table. And he's right here. He is right here in Auckland, and how many of you know about that? You don't. But he's right here, and it's the best Peking duck you'll ever actually have. They are here if you look for them.
It is very generous of you to share these secrets. Because I'm certainly not going to tell you where I get my favourite meals in Auckland. But if you all had to pick a dish that sums up New Zealand for you, New Zealand flavours, or the sense of being here, what would you pick? This is the impossible question, I know.
It is an impossible question, and everybody looked at me for some reason. When I was doing my chef's apprenticeship, I was standing amongst a couple of other chefs, and the chef that we were working under said to me, "Describe to me what you think your dish that you would love to eat if it was the last dish you could ever eat." And everyone went around, people were saying things like steak tartare and all of these things. And I just looked them dead in the eye and I said, if I could eat one dish, and it was my last ever dish, it would be savoury mince on toast.
Yes.
With a poached egg, runny yolk, and a side of Wari's tomato sauce.
Excellent.
And he just went to me, make it. So I made it. And he was like, I see you in this dish. And that one was, but cheap.
Connie, you'd have the Peking duck, would you?
No.
Or no?
No. Can I have two? I'd have to have Hainanese chicken rice and congee.
And congee,
Oh my God, congee, the best hangover food you'd ever have.
what would you have in, what toppings?
I'd have, I have the pork with the preserved egg. Peidanjok.
Delicious.
Delicious with spring onions. Oh, really good.
So two, you're allowed to have two. Ben, you only get one.
Oh, I'm a farm boy from the Waikato, and I always had the dream to go to France as soon as I started cooking, and so I wasn't exposed to any sort of, major ingredients, and so it's quite controversial. But have you ever had a roasted piece of foie gras?
No.
It's like
yeah.
it's unbelievable. Like, and you see how the French do it, and with a sweet wine, there's a wine called Chateau Yquem. It was just, I could never afford that. I mean, these and this was in a really, really great restaurant, and you're able to try that with the wine and experience it like a customer would. And I've never really had that experience after that. It was kind of, not from an ethical point of view at all, but from a point of view of just experience that culture and how two flavours work together, so well.
And Paul?
Crayfish, freshly caught, cooked with a chilled glass of Pinot Gris or Sauvignon Blanc.
No. What about you?
Yeah.
You don't want to put it in my grandfather's green bucket.
No.
Sorry, just got to clarify that one.
Definitely not crayfish from his I'm probably going to say white-bait fritters. Yeah, because it took me a long time to build myself up to actually eating them. The eyes were a little bit off-putting.
But they're pretty good.
But yes, I think New Zealand white-bait fritters. And a lot of what we're talking about comes down to the producers, really, doesn't it? I mean, food is about the people who grow it and who farm it, and the cheesemakers, the fishermen. So that change in our food culture is ultimately people-driven.
And it's where we celebrate it. It very often involves family or a special occasion. It's those special events which food brings people together. And it's quite often not the food itself, it's the event, but the food becomes an important centerpiece in that event.
I think we've got some time for questions. We've had some coming through on Twitter. Somebody wanted to know your thoughts on the new trend for supper clubs in people's homes, which is being seen in London and America. Do you think it's going to come here? I might give you that first, Ben. What do you think?
It's the first I've heard of it, so I'm behind the eight ball on that. So you're saying like a little late night cigar whiskey type thing, or?
Yes, run by non-professionals. So it's people who aren't professional chefs but may have had experience, but they're not actually charging you at the door.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, it's a little like late night house party.
Yeah, if anybody's got one, can you tweet us later? If we have any other questions, I think there was a question following on from your foie gras comment, actually. There was a question, what does the panel feel about more people going vegan and vegetarian? That might be a good one for the sociologists.
Well, I think it's part of the way in which food has now become, the food market's become more segmented. So, those of us who eat Wagyu beef, as opposed to, Connie, but there are people, okay, that's good. But there are very clear trends in terms of food and who eats it and how they eat it. And so many of us will be in families where a member of that family will be vegan or vegetarian, and it becomes quite a process of negotiating how you understand and treat food. And that's good. I think it's part of the growing up of New Zealand.
It's all about being more engaged with what you're eating.
Yes, and I think it's also about food sources. I mean, I interviewed a series of Chinese entrepreneurs and asked them why they came to New Zealand. And one of them owns a series of restaurants. And he said he went round the world. He went to the UK, Canada, the USA, Australia. New Zealand he picked because of the food. He knew exactly where it came from, the quality of it. All of that was really important for him, and that was why he decided to come to New Zealand. I think it's important for all of it. Well, for those of us who have discretionary income, I think there's a group in New Zealand who don't think about those things because, in fact, they probably don't have the income to afford to be selective about the food.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Paul will be walking through with the microphone, so if you do, just make yourself known to Paul. Perhaps come out to the end of the row if you've got a question for Connie or Paul or Ben or TK.
I was just curious, there's been some good commentary on dining culture together, bringing people together for conversation as well, but I've found tonight's format very heavily focused on dining out, takeaway, cheap eats, top end, low end as well. Just curious, particularly on TK's comment before, as a chef, that he felt like Sunday roast, he found somewhere to go and get it as opposed to cooking it. How do you feel the impact of social media, any media in general, and the shift towards food these days has on people cooking at home more?
Good question.
I personally think I go out, number one, because sometimes I'm just bloody lazy. And two, I'm intrigued by whether those roasts will live up to my own food memories. not to put any pressure on anyone out there, but also with social media, and I do it a lot myself, if I cook something on my barbecue, I bang out the Instagram, make up the collages, get my son to pose like this, like he's enjoying it, little videos, these things. I think that is the new way forward with cooking at home. Because you want to share that, then, well, it all comes down to who follows you on Instagram, and a lot of my family follow me on Instagram. So that's the only way they get to see me, really. So I send them these crazy videos. But I do really enjoy cooking at home, and I really do enjoy cooking for my little family. But usually when I'm by myself, it's quick and easy. What's happening? I'm going to go there. So
I think it's our responsibility to get the younger generation to cook. I remember Stephanie Alexander, when she was here, launching the first edition of the Cook's Companion, and she said the reason she wrote the Cook's Companion was because when she gave her nephew and niece a brown paper bag with some rice, some mushrooms and an onion in it, they did not know what to do with it. And so I just think that, it's all our responsibility to get the young ones cooking, or we're going to end up not eating at home.
Yeah.
Really.
I think there are two things that militate against the eating at home. One of them is that increasingly our social behaviour is to go out to eat, and the second thing is the cost of it. When you go around the food halls or the festivals or the night festivals here in Auckland, you can get very good meals at a cost that you could not equate with at home. I mean, they're cheaper. It's cheaper to go out and eat.
What do you think, Ben?
I think that's true, but also people, when they do shop, they might be inspired by a post or by an article or whatever, but I think what people do is they shop more times per week, so they'll go out and they'll hit a supermarket and they'll grab just enough for that meal that night. So, and I think it's going to cost them more in the long run, but hopefully these shows or whatever is happening out there around food is inspiring them to focus not necessarily on the weekly shop or the monthly shop, but focus on a shop for that dish and create something special.
They watch my kitchen rules and they think I'm going to shop tomorrow.
Well, I don't know, but the thing is that you'll go there, you've got a really good idea, you've got your recipe, and you'll go boom, 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 and you'll get the things that you want to get, and then you're gone, and you end up shopping 3 times a week, and it's like $500,
I think we have another
I was going to give him a shout out, actually.
Yeah.
Just on the point of the cost of cooking at home, I don't quite agree. There's quite an article a few weeks ago by Nikki Bezant in the Sunday Star Times about comparing takeaways with cooking at home, and it is cheaper to cook at home if you don't put a value on your time. And I think the issue is really time for people, and inclination to cook, and some skills. Also, some households don't have the necessary equipment, so that's an issue there. But the raw materials, in fact, can be way cheaper than takeout. Not all the time, but they can be. But my question was really one about food tourism. We're a country for tourism is one of our biggest overseas earners. Food tourism is one of the fastest growing segment of tourism in the world, yet in New Zealand tourism promotion, food and wine are barely mentioned. It's a great way for New Zealand to improve our income and attraction, just as certain places in Scandinavia have, based on food. What does the panel think we could do here to up that game and get more people coming here for fantastic food experiences?
I've thought about this quite a bit. I mean, I've got a bone to pick with, John Key is our Minister for Tourism, and we have these great, I know we have, like Metro and Cuisine and great guides here, and actually Cuisine magazine have done a great thing by bringing in the same standards that Australia has, so we've got something to kind of, go against. But John Key's got or the Tourism Board have got we've got one of the best cities in the world for eating out, and often you go to cities in the world and you can be disappointed because your expectations are so high, and you often have a few duds, and then you start to appreciate what we have back here in Auckland. So, I mean, they've had talks about bringing things like the Michelin Guide out and all that sort of stuff. Well, Australia have at least, but it's heavily driven by money, and you've got to pay to bring these big dogs out to judge our food. And if they did come out, they probably would only come to Auckland anyway, and they'd do Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, and that would be it. So I think that we need to kind of pat ourselves on the back a little bit in that respect.
I know that there's been a massive push in the food tourism in New Zealand. I only know this because I'm the voice for it. Welcome to a country of open spaces. And then there's these massive vineyards with people having meals in the corner. So I know that, and with that knowledge, I know that a lot of the advertising that New Zealand Tourism put out for the food tourism here in New Zealand, or for the food culture here, New Zealanders don't get to see. We never get to see it. We never get to see it. You've got to go deep into Google to find it, because it's sent specifically to businesses to encourage them to encourage their clientele to come to our country.
We've got another question here, and we've got some more waiting, so let's go to yours.
Kia ora koutou. I thought of this question, Te Kohe, when you were talking about working with particularly marae that were inward rather than coastal. Do you think an inward focus on food could be the impetus for an environmental movement when we start thinking more about the environment within which our food's produced, in particular for freshwater sources of protein?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment, a lot of the marae that I've frequented through the show, they have an element of mahi kai, mara kai, and kai wai, which is things that you gather, are gathered in a sustainable way. Things that, and anything you catch, you cook, and anything left over from it is either kept for the next hui that comes along. So the whole concept of our marae is being looked at now more as a lot of our marae are opening up to catering businesses. So I know there's 3 marae in the Tauranga area that cater for all the cruise ships that go there, and three of the chefs that run those marae are all trained chefs, and their thing is about sustainability, one in a monetary sense, so that the upgrades for them and the upkeep of the marae remain the same, but there's a sustainability also in the year-round gathering of all the ingredients. So there's a very big conscious move to going back to how certain Māori seasons, following the Māori calendar, for planting, fishing, gathering, and going back to that. So that knowledge is returning. And one of the biggest advocates for that knowledge that I've met through my Marae Kai Masters journey is a chef by the name of Joe McLeod. So he takes the concept of Māori medicine, Māori rongoa, and gives a whole massive scope while he's making a dish around the relationship between we as people to the things that we gather, food or flora and fauna, and how everything is interrelated. Everything has a mother, has a father, and then a youngster, and everything from the meat. So if it's a mutton bird, perhaps, there's 3 types of Māori rongoa or medicinal herbs that relate to that. So those things get applied to that meat. So this knowledge is starting to come back to all the marae. This is a massive journey, and it's going to take... It's sort of like you were talking about the science lab for the bully Wikipedia thing. It's like this is starting to happen in New Zealand now. But again, we go back to some of the other comments. A lot of things aren't written down, and so it's being passed on orally. But with this generation of the new generation of young people, I'll put myself in that category, coming through, we have the knowledge now to be able to categorize it, write it all down, put it up, so that it's not lost, and to explore these things. So it's been an amazing thing to watch the younger generation have a greater consciousness around, clean, green, Aotearoa, sustainability around the water sources, and cleaning up those awa so that some of these ingredients come back. Freshwater crayfish are starting to come back in areas that haven't been seen for years.
I think we've got one more question, and then we're just about out of time.
Good evening. Thank you very much for wonderful comments. I would just like to go back to the person that's talked about tourism and food. I actually work at the very high end of the tourism industry, and I want you to know that we do an enormous amount of work in promoting New Zealand food in restaurants, and Ben, dare I say it, that we're one of your best ambassadors.
This is news we need to communicate.
Taki, in terms of Maori food, we're very keen on that. Up in the Bay of Islands, there's a marae that we actually send our super yacht guests to for lunch. We do the same down in Wakatani.
You'll be interested in the next season of Marae Kai Masters because it's shot all in the Bay of Islands.
I can tell you that right now we're working with a joint venture on some very exciting projects in promoting our food and wine industry. And I can tell you that some of our very high-end guests will tell you that the food they've had here, the restaurants they've done, are absolutely world-class.
Fantastic.
So
Thank you.
People, we are an advocate.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I think we're just about out of time. All that remains is to ask you to give a very warm round of applause to our fantastic panel. Connie Clarkson, Professor Paul Spoonley, Ben Bailey, and Te Kohe Tuhaka. Thank you all very much. And with that, I'll release you from your duties. Surrender your headsets and leave us. Thank you all very much. Just so you know, the next Smart Talk is the last Smart Talk of the season. The theme is Auckland as an island, how our city is shaped by people with ideas. We're going to look at the next 5 years in Auckland and hear about some of those ideas with a panel that includes Rod Oram and Marina Matthews and Waikare Komeni. Bill Ralston will be in the chair. And judging from the rate at which these have been selling out, you might want to buy your tickets now before you go.